I've done a number of episodes about this over the years, and I've learned three things that I hold to be true, and I want you to refine those and teach me some more about them.
Sure.
One is that trafficking is not what most people think. Most people think about it in terms of what you see in movies with people being put in containers and shipped around. That does happen. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's not always nearly as exotic as that. Number two, I don't know what the ratio is, but it's typically, I've found, more slave labor than sexual in nature, although that's more sensational and salacious, but it's more getting these people working for nothing and holding them kind of captive to that. Then third, it's happening all around us. We go to restaurants, we go to hotels, we go to events, and we're rubbing elbows with these people that you don't have to be interacting with prostitutes or drug dealers or whatever to be encountering these people in our lives, that they're in our lives, in our everyday world, particularly in major cities. Are
Right, and
those,
also in rural areas,
yeah, certainly.
in the agricultural industry. Yeah, right.
Certainly if you're in farming
Yeah.
areas and agricultural areas,
Mm-hmm.
we're less likely to interact with them there, but they're certainly represented there. Am I understanding the general topography of this thing?
That's right, exactly. I'm glad you said that, Dr. Phil, because you're right. I think we should not sensationalize this issue. It's bad enough as it is. And we've been around for almost 24 years, and almost every year, 50% of our cases are forced labor cases, 50% are sex trafficking cases. So as a community, it behooves us to really look at this holistically and not focus solely on sex trafficking like a lot of movies or TV shows do.
Okay, so how is this happening? Because I'll promise you, within 5 minutes, we're at Paramount Studios right now, which is in the middle of Hollywood. This is a very famous lot. We're just a few blocks off of Sunset here. We're at Melrose and Gower, right in the middle of Hollywood. I guarantee you we could go 5 minutes from here to Hollywood and Vine, to some of the areas where there are big restaurants, big hotels, and street corners, and find both forced labor and sex workers that are being trafficked by someone.
Last year, 30% of our over 30% of our cases were in the hospitality industry, and those were all forced labor cases. It's also domestic servitude happening in very affluent areas 5 minutes from here. It's happening in restaurants and hotels and motels. So yes, that's why we need to educate ourselves that this is so much more than sex trafficking or what you would see on television.
Who are they and how did it happen?
Sometimes there are children who are, they're running away from home. They don't have a great home life, and recruiters or traffickers themselves can hone in on that and trick them into thinking that they love them or that they have a better opportunity for them. Foreign nationals, so people who are immigrants who are, again, tricked by foreign labor brokers in their hometown, in their country of origin, and they're tricked into thinking they have a great job here in the United States. Many times our clients don't even know that they are in Los Angeles. They just know that they're in the US. And, sometimes they are, going to the supermarket with the trafficker and their family, or taking care of the trafficker's children in the case of domestic servitude. Sometimes they're working in a restaurant and they have to sleep and live and work all in the same place. So it's a lot of different scenarios, but the number one common theme is that they are exploited commercially. So they are exploited for profit. And what that means is one human being is exploiting another in order to make a profit.
That's exactly what I was wanting you to break down for me. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I'm wanting to go even more granular than that
Sure.
because I want people to understand. Let's talk about domestic. I'm going to talk about foreign nationals in a minute. I'm not saying they're any less important. Let's say some teenager in Idaho runs away because there's chaos in the home, there's violence in the home, or there are rules they don't want to do. And I tell these runaways all the time, old sayings get to be old sayings because they're profound. And that old saying that the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence, they'll think, I can be free out there. And so they run away. And I've talked to so many of them that have said, oh, I wish I could go back home. That curfew doesn't seem like such a big issue now.
Right.
But they do run away. Maybe they hitchhike to LA or New York or Chicago or wherever. Let's say LA, since that's where we are. They get here and they're on the street. Maybe they have enough money for a night or two, but they're on the street. How do these traffickers spot them? How do they approach them? What do they say to them?
Well, first of all, I should say too, sometimes, kids might be part of the queer community. And so life at home is really difficult, right? So it's not always grass is greener. Sometimes they have to leave for a good reason. But what traffickers do, they'll either go in themselves or sometimes they use a recruiter and they prey on people's vulnerability. So whether that be that they're trying to escape a bad situation at home or trying to move forward into a place of acceptance somewhere else in a new town or city, traffickers know how to spot vulnerability. That is the number one thing we see in all of our cases, DrPhil. And, what they say is, hey, I totally understand you, let me help you. And it's either pretending to love them like a family member would, or they're saying, let me help you make some money. I know that that's what you need. So it takes on a lot of different scenarios in each case, but the common theme is preying upon someone's vulnerability.
All right. And you say they spot them. Let's talk about that, because if these recruiters or traffickers are hanging around some of these high traffic areas, you can tell, for example, watching whether somebody's walking with purpose from A to B or they have nowhere to go.
They're lost.
They're
yes.
loitering. They're kind of walking without purpose. They're leaning against the building. They look hungry. They're dirty. They don't have anywhere to go, versus somebody that's on a mission. They're trying to get from their home to the library or to work or whatever. So they spot them, and that's the first cue. So they go up and say, hey, what's up? You hungry? You need something? Can I help you? They offer
help.
It's a pretty low bar, right? Because that person has nowhere to go, nothing to eat, no money, no plan, no nothing. Almost anything is appealing.
Right. That's exactly right. I remember working with a young woman not that long ago, and she was she was a young woman and married and was in a domestic violence situation. So she was trying to escape that. And, she was on the streets of Santa Monica. She tried to go to the police several times. They did not listen to her and basically just said, go to this shelter. And there, the shelter also didn't recognize human trafficking. And so she never got the services that she really needed. It wasn't a proper intervention. And so she was, wandering the streets of Santa Monica, and this young man, swooped in, pretended that he cared about her, pretended that he loved her eventually, and he trafficked her. And so this is a common scenario that traffickers use in order to control the victims. They make them almost dependent on them.
Given that they had nothing and nowhere to go, forming dependency happens really quick and really easy.
That's right.
Okay, so when you say trafficking is about one person exploiting another person for profit, there's nothing wrong with somebody being an agent for someone else and taking a percentage, or what if somebody said, hey, I can get you a job. That's how Hollywood works. There are agents and managers and all, but that's not what we're talking about.
No,
here.
that is definitely not what we're talking about.
Totally different situation.
Yeah. So there's something in the definition of trafficking called force, fraud, or coercion. So force is pretty straightforward, right? And fraud is what we were talking about earlier, where they're being tricked into thinking that life will be better if they go with the trafficker. And coercion takes on a lot of different, it can be done in a lot of ways. It might be threatening for foreign nationals, threatening to get them deported, or it might be like other types of threats that coerces them into going with the trafficker. So if you have force or fraud or coercion in these cases, that's what makes it human trafficking.
The fraud can be love bombing them, gaslighting them, making promises,
Tricking them, yeah.
just tricking them.
Yep.
Let's say they bring them home with them, put them to work, and don't provide for them at any reasonable level whatsoever. But they may also have 20 or 30 of these people in restaurants or hotels doing maid service, lawn service, all sorts of things.
Yeah, or events, like you said earlier.
Yeah.
We get that a lot, DrPhil. And it really struck me when you said that, because I remember talking to a young woman who was, she was trafficked into a home in a very ritzy area here in LA. And this family had a lot of events. And no one noticed that this woman was there all of the time and washing the dishes and cleaning up after the event until 5 a.m, starting again the next morning at 7 a.m. So there are signs, and you were correct in saying that probably most of us have interfaced with a victim of trafficking and just simply didn't know it because we didn't know what to look for.
My son's a musician. He just got back from like a 75 city tour where they did all amphitheaters, like 15 or 20,000 people. And there's tons of staff there, and they're all wearing, just says staff on it. And you look at some of these kids and they've all got a vacant stare. They look underfed. They're not well groomed. They don't have things that kids their age would normally have. They're not whipping out smartphones.
Right.
They don't know each other. You just know that those kids are in a forced situation.
Right. So in there, I would look at how were they recruited? What kind of contract did they sign, if they have a contract even? So those are the types of things you'd want to look for in that particular industry. In a lot of our cases, people will be provided a contract, and then when they go to sign it, it's a completely different contract. But at that point, they feel like they already have to sign because they've made a verbal commitment. So there's a lot of things that we can look for as systems as well, right? It's not just a person-to-person thing. It is also looking at the systems that, like a recruitment system, that is exploiting these people. So events, you're right. Like as soon as you said a tour, my thought was looking at who's setting up for those tours, who's breaking all of it down, like kind of like the construction industry, because we've seen a lot of cases in construction as well, not just hospitality. So I think a lot of folks, because we aren't really covering this a lot enough in television and in the media about forced labor and how that can take place.
Hey, but what happens if, let's say you're at a restaurant and there's a busboy or girl over there that is, you can see them in the kitchen or they're bussing a table, and your gut tells you
something's off.
This isn't right.
Yeah. Listen to that.
Then you say something to that young person. They've been really schooled on what to say and how to answer the question. What do you say to those people?
Right. And they're most likely being watched, and they know who's watching them, right? You might not know that, but they will know. And so they're probably not making direct eye contact. They probably don't want to answer your questions. It is important not to intervene. I want your listeners or your viewers to understand that.
You get them in a lot of trouble.
You could make it worse for them. What you would say to people like that, let's say it is in a restaurant scenario, you would say, "Are you okay? Okay, I understand if you can't talk, but here's a hotline number. That is really important. If they can have something that is discreet, that they can maybe have in their pocket, and they call when it's safe to do so. We always say something at CAST, and that is that victims or survivors, they are the most knowledgeable about how to stay safe, not anybody else. So it's really up to them to make that call. What we can do as a society, as a community, is make sure that we've got 24/7 care so that when that person is ready to call, it might be 2 a.m, but that someone who is trained and well-versed in getting people to safety is on the other side of that phone call.
Mm-hmm. We've talked to our viewers about this, and I've had emails back from people that have done exactly that. They've written down a hotline number, a safe house number, a place
That's right.
in their city
Yep.
where they can go and have just walked past the bus boy or the girl cleaning the table or whatever and just put it in their pocket or handed it to them
Mm-hmm.
and said, here's a number if you need it. Just kept walking, not drawing attention to it. And sure enough, it might be a few hours, it might be a month, but that person uses that phone number and calls, and sometimes until they get the opportunity or they get the courage.
That's right.
And, maybe who's watching them goes out of town or goes to sleep or
Yep.
whatever.
Goes out on an errand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe they're listening to this or a friend of theirs is listening to this right now. They need to know when they do make the call, they're not going to be pressured to do something they don't want to do
Never.
or they're not ready to do. I don't want anyone that's caught in this situation right now to think, oh man, when I make that call, I'm in it now. That's not true. What's going to happen is when they call that hotline number that's going to be on DrPhil.com, it's going to be on the podcast site, it's going to be on my Facebook page, it's going to be tweeted, it's going to be everywhere. When they make that call, the person on the other end is going to listen, they're going to answer questions, they're going to let them know what their options are. They're not going to get them in trouble.
Exactly. They're trained counselors and advocates, right? So it's not an arm of law enforcement. A lot of our clients, a lot of survivors are afraid to call a hotline because they think that it's law enforcement or government. And they're, for good reason, right? They have not had good experiences with law enforcement, which we can talk about in a little bit, how this issue of forced criminality is so huge in the issue of human trafficking. So it's important that they know this is a nonprofit organization. It is trained counselors and advocates who are there to listen and help them devise a plan that's comfortable for them, right? So a lot of what we do is safety planning on that hotline. And if someone's not ready to leave right there and then, that's okay. No one's going to force them to do that because they're in charge of their own safety. And we're kind of like a partner in helping them figure out a plan to escape.